I want to tell you about a specific kind of lie. Not the spontaneous kind, panic lie, the stupid lie, the one people tell in a moment because they can't think fast enough. Those lies are almost understandable, human even. No, I want to tell you about the other kind, the constructed kind. The kind that requires weeks, sometimes months of deliberate planning, where someone looks at the person who trusts them most and decides consciously to build an entire false reality around them, and then inhabit it daily. That kind of lie requires something beyond dishonesty. It requires a specific, sustained contempt for the person being deceived. And the three people at the center of today's stories, a woman who discovered her husband had faked an entire career, a man who found out his wife had been stealing his creative work for years, and a woman left holding the debt for an affair she didn't know was happening, all encountered that contempt firsthand. What they did next is why we're here. Let's get into it.
Story 1. My husband convinced me to quit my job and move cities. The career opportunity he moved us for didn't exist. He made it up. From u/the job was never real on r/surviving infidelity. Part 1. The opportunity. Leah had a life that worked. That's the phrase she used at the start of her Reddit post. Not a perfect life, not an amazing life, just a life that worked. She had a job she was good at, a marketing director role at a regional healthcare network in Charlotte, North Carolina. She had an apartment she decorated over 4 years into something that felt like herself. She had friends nearby, real ones, the kind built over time, who knew her coffee order and her mother's name, and the specific laugh she did when something was actually funny versus politely funny. She had Garrett. Garrett was her husband of 3 years, together for 6. He worked in commercial construction project management, the kind of job that sounds stable and moderately unglamorous, which suited him, because Garrett was a person who moved through the world with a particular brand of quiet confidence that Leah had always found grounding. He wasn't flashy, he was steady, or he seemed to be. About 18 months before Leah's Reddit post, Garrett came home one evening with what he described as significant news. He had been approached through a former colleague about a project management director position with a large construction firm based in Nashville. It was a substantial step up, 60% salary increase, equity in the company after 2 years, the kind of opportunity, he said, that didn't come twice, the kind you'd regret not taking. There was one condition. The role was Nashville-based. They would need to move. Leah sat with this. She asked the reasonable questions. Had he spoken to the company directly? Yes, he said. He'd had 2 calls with the VP of operations. Was the offer in writing? Not yet, he said. They were moving through final approvals, but it was as good as confirmed. The colleague who'd connected them had vouched for the company personally. Everything checked out. She had concerns about her own job. Garrett had a response to each one. Her field was transferable, Nashville was growing, this was a 2-income household, and his increase would give her time to find the right next role rather than just any role. He was prepared. He had thought it through. He was, as ever, steady. She trusted him. After 6 years, trust was not a thing she examined anymore. It was just the air in the room. She resigned from her position. She left 8 weeks' notice because she was the kind of person who left things correctly. She said goodbye to colleagues she'd worked alongside for 4 years. She sold furniture that wouldn't fit the new place. She hugged her friends and made promises to visit. She packed up the apartment she decorated into herself and loaded it into a moving truck. They moved to Nashville in October. Part 2. The first thing that didn't add up. Garrett started the new job, by his account, The week after they arrived, he left the house at the right times. He came home at the right times. He talked about work the way people talk about work, vaguely, selectively, with enough specificity to seem real and enough vagueness to not be questioned. He mentioned colleagues by first name. He mentioned a project in Brentwood that was running behind schedule. He mentioned a VP named Craig who was particular about site reports. Leah was busy. She was deep in the specific exhaustion of rebuilding a life from scratch in a city she didn't know, setting up utilities and finding a dentist and figuring out which grocery store was worth the drive and starting the job search that Garrett had promised her she'd have time to approach carefully. She was preoccupied. He knew she would be. That was, she later understood, part of the calculation. The first thing that didn't add up was a Thursday in January, 3 months after the move. Leah was driving. She'd finally started learning the city, taking new routes deliberately to build a mental map, and she drove past a construction site that Garrett had mentioned by address as one of his current projects. She slowed down without planning to, and she sat there for a moment, looking at a site that was very clearly not active. No workers, no equipment movement, a fence around an empty lot with a permit sign that, when she squinted, showed a company name she didn't recognize, not Garrett's company. She filed it in the back of her mind. There was probably an explanation. She didn't say anything. 3 weeks later, she was looking for the number of Garrett's company. She'd wanted to send a thank you card to the HR person who'd processed his benefits enrollment, because Leah was genuinely that kind of person, and she realized she did not have the company's address written anywhere. She searched for the company by name. It had no web presence, no LinkedIn page, no Google Maps listing, no Better Business Bureau record, no news mentions, no existence as far as the internet was concerned whatsoever. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she called the number Garrett had given her for his office, the one she'd never needed to use before. It rang 4 times. Then a generic automated voicemail picked up. No company name, no greeting, just a beep. She did not leave a message. Part 3. What she found and what it meant. Leah spent the following 2 weeks doing something she described in her Reddit post as the loneliest investigation of her life. She was not a suspicious person by nature. She had never checked Garrett's phone. She had never questioned his accounts of his days. She was doing it now with the specific, nauseating feeling of someone who already knows what they're going to find, but needs to see it anyway. She found the following things in roughly this order. The company Garrett claimed to work for was not a real company. It was an LLC he had registered himself 4 months before the Nashville move, with himself as sole member. It had a business checking account. It had no employees, no clients, no revenue. It was a legal shell designed to look like an employer. The salary being deposited into their joint account each month was coming from that LLC, which was funded by a draw from a personal savings account Garrett had held separately for years, an account Leah had not known about, which contained approximately $41,000 he had accumulated quietly. He was paying himself a salary from his own savings through a fake company to maintain the appearance of employment. He had not been going to work. For 4 months, he had been leaving the house, driving to, she later determined, a coffee shop, a gym, and an apartment across town. The apartment across town was where Sophie lived, a woman Garrett had evidently been in a relationship with in parallel for approximately 14 months, beginning 4 months before the Nashville move and continuing through the present. The move to Nashville had not been about a job opportunity. There was no job opportunity. The move had been engineered to place Leah far from her professional network, her personal support system, and anyone who might ask questions he couldn't answer, while he structured a life in which Sophie was accessible and Leah was contained. He resigned her from her career, uprooted her life, drained a private savings account month by month, and maintained the performance for 4 months. Leah posted her story on Reddit on a Thursday night. She had left the house that afternoon, gone to her sister's place. Her sister had driven down from Kentucky the moment she called and had not gone back. The post had 34,000 upvotes by morning.
Part 4. What came after. Leah was not without resources, and she was not without fury. But the fury, she wrote, was not the thing she led with. The thing she led with was her former employer. She called her old VP in Charlotte the Friday after she left, not to ask for her job back. She had too much self-respect for that framing. She called to tell him she was available if there was anything worth discussing. He called her back within 2 hours. There was, as it turned out, a director-level role that had been newly created, a role that Leah's specific background made her the obvious candidate for. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. She was back in Charlotte in a corporate apartment with a signed offer letter within 3 weeks of leaving Nashville. The divorce was not pleasant, but it was thorough. Leah's attorney established that the LLC Garrett had used to simulate employment was marital deception of the first order, and that the private savings account he had drawn from, funds accumulated during the marriage, were marital assets. The financial settlement reflected this. Nashville was Garrett's city, not hers. He could keep it. Sophie, for what it's worth, did not keep Garrett. According to a mutual contact who updated Leah months later, the relationship had not survived the exposure of the full picture. Sophie had not known about Leah, or the fake job, or the scope of the construction. When she did know, she was done. Garrett returned to Charlotte as well. There was nothing for him in Nashville that hadn't been built on a lie, and by all accounts, was rebuilding from a position several floors below where he'd started. Leah's final line in her Reddit post was, "He moved me to a city I didn't choose, so I'd be too disoriented to notice him disappearing. I noticed. I just needed 3 months. He needed 4 years and $41,000, and he still ran out of time." That line got 19,000 upvotes on its own. Take a breath, because Leah's story, the fake company, the fake commute, the manufactured city, is the kind of thing that makes you put your phone down and just stare for a second. This channel exists for exactly this. Real people, real situations, real outcomes that mean something. If you're not subscribed to Venture and Karma yet, this is your moment. Tap subscribe, hit the bell, and every week you'll be in the room when the next story drops. Okay, story 2. And I want to say this up front. Story 2 is different from everything we've done on this channel before, because this time, the person doing the betraying is a woman, and what she did over 4 years, completely invisibly, is one of the most quietly devastating things I've ever read on Reddit.
Story 2. My wife was entering my screenplays into competitions and collecting the prize money. I found out when I won an award I never entered. By the words were always mine on r/AITA. Part 1. The Writer and the Work. Owen had been writing screenplays since he was 19 years old, not as a hobby, as a vocation. The distinction mattered to him, and he was clear about it in his Reddit post. He was not a hobbyist who dabbled. He was someone for whom writing was the primary way he made sense of the world, and he approached it with the serious, private, unglamorous discipline of someone who understood that the work only exists if you show up for it every day, regardless of how you feel. He wasn't famous, he was good. There's a large population of writers who exist in that space, genuinely skilled, consistently producing, recognized within smaller circles, never quite breaking into the mainstream. Owen had 3 feature-length screenplays that he was proud of, 7 short-form scripts, and a body of work that represented roughly 6 years of serious creative output. He'd entered a few competitions early on, placed in 2, and then largely stopped competing, not from discouragement, but because he was working on longer-form projects, and competitions felt like a distraction from the actual goal. He met Claudia at 26. She was a paralegal, sharp and organized in the specific way that some very organized people are. She ran systems the way other people breathed. Her home was immaculate. Her finances were precise. Her calendar was synchronized. Owen, who was by his own admission a creative disaster in the domestic sense, found this deeply restoring. She handled the architecture of their shared life with competence and genuine pleasure, and he was grateful for it in the way that someone is grateful for a function they couldn't perform themselves. They married at 28. By 32, the year the story breaks open, they had been together for 6 years, married for 4, and Owen had completed what he considered his strongest screenplay, a feature-length script called Meridian, which he'd spent 2 years on, and which his small network of writer peers had responded to with the specific enthusiasm of people who rarely respond with enthusiasm. He was proud of it. He was protective of it. He was not yet sure what to do with it. He did not know that Claudia had already decided. Part 2. The email that arrived on a Tuesday. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Owen was at his desk working on an outline when it came through to his personal account. The subject line was, "Congratulations, Pacific Rim Screenplay Competition, first place, feature category." He opened it. He read it. He read it again. He had not entered the Pacific Rim Screenplay Competition. He had not entered any competition in over 2 years. He read the email a third time, assuming some kind of spam or misdirection. But the email contained specific details. The title of the winning screenplay was Meridian. The entrant name was listed as Owen's full name. The prize, $4,500, wired to a bank account on file. He didn't recognize them. He sat at his desk for a while. He thought about Claudia's very particular talent for organization. He thought about all the time she had asked to read his work. He thought about the external hard drive where he stored his scripts, the one that lived on the shared desk in the office they both used. He thought about the fact that she had, at various points over the years, offered to help him organize his submissions process, and he had always waved it off as unnecessary. He went to his laptop and searched his own name alongside the words "Screenplay Competition." He found 14 entries, 14 competitions over a period of 4 years in his name for his scripts. He cross-referenced the dates against his own records. He had not entered none of them. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he called his bank and added a secondary savings account, separate just for himself, before he did anything else. He wasn't sure why, it just felt like the right first move. Part 3. The conversation and what came out of it. Owen waited until that evening. He made dinner. He was, as he accounted for it, the cook in the household, and he set the table, and he waited until they were both seated, and he said, "I got an email today from a competition I didn't enter." He watched Claudia's face. He had been watching her face for 6 years, and he knew all of its registers. What moved through it in the 2 seconds after he said that sentence was not confusion. It was the very specific expression of someone whose contingency plan has just become necessary. She said, "Which competition?" Not, "What do you mean?" Not, "That's strange." She said, "Which competition?" which told him in those two words everything he needed to confirm. He told her which one. He told her about the email. He told her about the 14 results he'd found online. She did not deny it. She explained it. And the explanation, which Owen shared in full in his Reddit post, was, in its way, more difficult to process than the deception itself. She said that she believed in his work more than he believed in himself. She said that he kept not submitting, kept delaying, kept saying the scripts weren't ready, and she had watched him hold back work she felt deserved to be seen. She said that she had started entering competitions on his behalf because she wanted him to succeed, and then the prize money started coming in, and she put it in a separate account because she wasn't sure how to explain it, and it had grown into something she couldn't figure out how to surface, and she had convinced herself that she would tell him when the time was right, and the time was never right, and 4 years went by. Owen listened to the full explanation. Then he asked one question: "How much is in the account?" The total across 14 competitions over 4 years was $23,400. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's my money for my work." She said she knew that. He said, "I need you to transfer it to me tonight, and then I need some time to think." She transferred the money that night, the full amount. Owen posted his story on Reddit the next day. The response was enormous and complicated because this story, unlike most, does not have a clean villain. The comments section split almost evenly between people who were horrified by what Claudia had done, entering someone's creative work without their knowledge, controlling the financial outcome for 4 years, and people who felt the complication of her stated motivation. Owen addressed this split in a comment that got 28,000 upvotes. He wrote, "A lot of people are asking if I believe her when she says she did it because she believed in me. I do believe her. I also know that believing in someone doesn't give you the right to make their decisions for them. She spent 4 years deciding what happened to my work and my money without asking me. The love in it doesn't cancel the control." Part 4, Where It Went. Owen and Claudia are still together as of his Reddit post, separated in the house, working with a couples therapist, making no decisions quickly. He wrote that he is not certain where it will land. He's not certain she is either. He said the $23,400 is sitting in his personal account and he has not touched it because he's not sure yet if it's a beginning or a settlement. What he did with the momentum of the revelation was this. He submitted Meridian to 3 major competitions himself under his own name using an email address only he could access. Within 4 months, it placed in 2 of them and won 1. The win came with $8,000 and, more importantly, a connection to a producer who had been a judge on the panel. That connection is ongoing. Owen ended his post with something that has stayed in my head since I read it. The strangest part is that she was right. The work was ready. I just wasn't. But being right about something doesn't mean you get to make the choice. That part was mine. I need you to stay with me because story 3 is the one I've been building toward, and I want to give you a specific warning before we go in. This story starts with a woman who discovers something that would stop most people completely in their tracks. She's left holding a significant financial debt for an affair she had no idea was happening, and the first 20 minutes of her story, she is genuinely lost. I'm not going to skip that part because her being lost is what makes what she does next so extraordinary. Most revenge stories are about people who knew exactly what they were doing from the start. Zoe's story is about someone who had absolutely no idea and figured it out anyway, step by step, in real time. And the mechanism she finds is one of the most specific and satisfying things I have encountered on Reddit in a long time. Are you ready? Let's go.
Story 3. My ex used my credit signature to fund 2 years of his affair. Hotels, flights, jewelry. When we broke up, he left me with the debt. I got every dollar back. By user signed for nothing I bought on r/pro revenge. Part 1. The signature and what it cost her. Zoe was 31 when her relationship with Aaron ended. They had been together for 4 years, lived together for 2. He was a sales manager at a medical device company. Good income, confident, the kind of person who was easy to be around in social settings and somewhat harder to read in private ones. About a year into living together, Aaron had approached Zoe about co-signing a business loan. He wanted to start a side business, event equipment rentals, chairs and tables and tents for corporate functions, the kind of unglamorous infrastructure business that he'd argued had strong margins and low overhead. He'd done his research, he said. He had a business plan. He had one client already interested. What he needed was a co-signer for a $28,000 small business loan because his own debt-to-income ratio was tight from a previous car loan. Zoe was careful about money. She asked questions. He had answers. She reviewed what he showed her. It looked plausible, and she loved him, and love is its own kind of due diligence failure in certain situations. She co-signed. The business, over the following 2 years, never quite materialized. Aaron always had an explanation. A client had backed out. The market was soft right now. He was pivoting the model slightly. She checked in on it periodically. He always had enough information to satisfy a surface-level question. She stopped asking as often. Life was full. She trusted him. When they broke up, the breakup was Aaron's initiation, which felt abrupt and slightly off in a way Zoe couldn't fully articulate at the time. He moved out within 2 weeks, efficient, organized. Looking back, she understood that this too had been prepared. 3 weeks after he left, she received a letter from the bank. The loan, the $28,000 loan she had co-signed, was in default. Aaron had stopped making payments 4 months prior. As co-signer, she was now equally liable for the outstanding balance, which had grown with fees to just under $26,000. She called Aaron. He did not pick up. She texted. He replied once to say that the business hadn't worked out, that he was sorry, and that he was in a difficult financial position himself. He then blocked her number. Part 2. The discovery inside the discovery. Zoe hired a consumer debt attorney to understand her options. She was not yet looking for a fight. She was looking for clarity. What were her obligations? What were her rights? What did co-sign or liability actually mean in practice? Her attorney was methodical. He requested documentation from the lender, the full history of the loan account, the disbursement records, the payment history. This documentation arrived in a folder, and Zoe sat down with her attorney to go through it. The loan had been dispersed in one lump sum into a business checking account registered to Aaron's Equipment Rental LLC. What the documentation also showed, because the lender had recorded the account activity as part of the default investigation, was a transaction history. No equipment had been purchased, no vendor deposits, no rental income received, no business activity of any kind. What the account showed across 22 months was a series of withdrawals and transfers that her attorney cross-referenced with public records with brisk professional efficiency. Hotel charges, flight bookings, a jewelry retailer, restaurant charges in cities Aaron told Zoe he'd been at for work conferences, a recurring monthly charge to a vacation rental platform, spa bookings, a florist. 22 months of documented affair expenses run through a business account that Zoe had co-signed for,
under the pretense of equipment rental company. He had not been building a business, he had been building a relationship, on paper, on her credit, with her signature at the bottom of the loan that made it possible. She sat in her attorney's office and looked at the transaction history for a while. Then she said, "Can I keep a copy of this?" Her attorney said, "Yes." She took the folder home. She made 2 additional copies. She stored them in 3 separate places. And then she opened Reddit. Specifically, she opened r/legal advice and asked a very specific question. If I can prove that a loan I co-signed was obtained under false pretenses and that the funds were used for purposes entirely unrelated to what the borrower represented to me at signing, what are my options? Part 3. The thread that changed everything. The responses to her post were numerous and varied in quality, as Reddit legal advice threads tend to be. But buried in the comments, posted by a user whose flair indicated they were a practicing attorney, was a response that Zoe screenshotted immediately and sent to her actual attorney that same night. The comment explained the doctrine of fraudulent inducement in the context of loan co-signing. If a co-signer can demonstrate that they were induced to sign a financial instrument through material misrepresentation, that is, if the person who asked them to sign made specific false claims about the purpose of the loan that the co-signer relied on in making their decision, the co-signer may have grounds to pursue the primary borrower for damages in civil court. The co-signer's liability to the lender typically remains, but a successful civil claim against the primary borrower could result in the recovery of the full outstanding balance, plus legal costs, plus, in some jurisdictions, additional damages. The key element, the comment noted, was documentation. You needed to show what was represented versus what was done. Zoe had 22 months of transaction records showing exactly what was done. And she had text messages, she had kept them all out of ordinary habit, in which Aaron, at multiple points during the 2 years, had described the business's progress, mentioned specific equipment purchases that the bank records showed never happened, and referenced clients and contracts that did not exist. She had his representations in writing from his own phone. She forwarded the Reddit thread to her attorney with a one-line message, "Is this what I think it is?" He called her back in 30 minutes. "Yes," he said, "and your documentation is unusually good."
Part 4. The case and the thing that happened in court. They filed a civil claim against Aaron for fraudulent inducement, seeking the full outstanding loan balance of $25,800 plus legal fees. Aaron responded through his own attorney hired quickly with the argument that the business had been a legitimate venture that had simply failed, and that Zoe had co-signed with full understanding of the risk of business failure. He characterized the transaction records as personal expenses paid through the business account, which he called improper bookkeeping rather than fraud. His position, essentially, was the business failed, businesses failed, a co-signer assumes that risk. Zoe's attorney had anticipated this argument precisely. His response were the transaction records, specifically a set of hotel and flight bookings cross-referenced with dates Aaron had told Zoe he was out of town for work. She had the texts. She had his words describing work trips. She had the hotel records showing those same dates in the same cities billed to the business account. She had the florist charges. She had the jewelry receipts. And then Zoe's attorney did something that Aaron's attorney had not anticipated. He subpoenaed Aaron's personal phone records, not the content of the messages. Phone records don't provide that, but the call and data logs, which showed the cell tower locations associated with Aaron's phone during the periods he had claimed to be at work conferences. His phone had been in the same cities as the hotel bookings, and it had been there at the same times as another number, a number that through further subpoena and discovery was identified as belonging to a woman Aaron had been in a relationship with during the entire period in question. The woman's name is not in Zoe's post. Zoe was deliberate about that.
She is not the point, Zoe wrote. She was a person Aaron had deceived as thoroughly as he deceived Zoe. But the phone records were the point, because they placed Aaron in the locations of the business expenses with the person the expenses were clearly intended for at the exact times he had told Zoe he was elsewhere for work. The case did not go to full trial. Aaron's attorney requested a settlement conference 2 weeks before the scheduled hearing date. At the conference, Aaron agreed to pay Zoe the full outstanding loan balance, $25,800, plus her legal fees, which came to an additional $6,400. Total recovered, $32,200. Zoe used $62,000 of it to pay off the defaulted loan in full, clearing her credit entirely. The remaining $6,200 she described in her Reddit post as the most expensive lesson about reading contracts that I'll never need to learn again. Part 5. The detail that made Reddit lose its mind. Zoe's post got 41,000 upvotes. The comments were, predictably, an enthusiastic combination of legal analysis, admiration, and solidarity. But there was one reply, Zoe's own reply to a commenter who asked what she was doing now, that got more upvotes than the original post. The commenter asked, "What happened to you after all of this? Are you okay?" Zoe replied, "More than okay. I used the experience to understand financial and legal documents better than I ever had before. I enrolled in a paralegal certification program 6 months after the settlement. I finished it 8 months after that. I'm currently working at a firm that specializes in consumer fraud cases. I help people in exactly the position I was in understand exactly what I figured out." That reply got 44,000 upvotes. The most liked comment under it was, "She went from victim to practitioner." She didn't just get her money back, she turned the whole experience into a career. Zoe replied to that one too. She wrote, "He used my signature, I used the education." 3 stories, 3 completely different situations. And that last line, "He used my signature, I used the education," I think about that a lot. That's the kind of sentence that doesn't happen by accident. That's what clarity sounds like when someone has done the real work of getting there. This channel is here every week with stories like these. Real people who went through real things and came out the other side knowing more than they did going in. If you're not subscribed, do it now. The button's right there. And the bell means you won't miss a single one. And before we close, drop a comment and tell me which story hit you hardest this week. I read every single one. Okay, let's land this.
The 3 things these stories teach us. 3 different stories, 3 different betrayals, 3 different scales of damage, and 3 completely different responses to that damage. Leah didn't know her entire relocation had been engineered. She rebuilt from a city she hadn't chosen, called her old boss, got back the career she'd earned, and left a man who had spent $41,000 and 4 months of his life on a performance that didn't survive a single phone call to a competition line office. Owen discovered that the person who loved him most had also controlled him most, and that those 2 things can coexist without either canceling the other out. He's not finished deciding what that means for his marriage, but he is submitting his own work now, in his own name, and a producer has his script. Whatever happens in his personal life, the work is moving. Zoe signed a document she shouldn't have signed, in trust she shouldn't have placed, in a relationship that was built on a performance she had no way to see. And then she went to law school, essentially. She became the kind of person who helps other people understand the documents they're signing. She converted the most expensive lesson of her life into a profession. There is a pattern here, and I want to name it clearly because I think it's the most useful thing I can offer at the end of this video. None of these 3 people were naive. Leah was trusting after 6 years of marriage. Owen was focused on his work,
and grateful for a partner who handled what he couldn't. Zoe was in love and co-signed something for someone she had reason to believe in. These are not acts of stupidity. These are acts of ordinary human trust, extended to people who had deliberately constructed themselves to receive it. The failure was not theirs. The failure was in the person who looked at that trust and saw an opportunity to exploit it. And here is the thing about that kind of failure. It doesn't stay with the person who caused it. It passes to the person who experienced it. And the question, the only question that matters at the end of any betrayal story, is what they do with it. Leah called her old VP. Owen submitted his own work. Zoe enrolled in a program. None of them waited for someone to fix it. None of them organized their lives around getting back at the person who hurt them. None of them wasted much energy on a person who had already demonstrated very thoroughly that they weren't worth it. They just got back to work. That's the whole story. That's always the whole story. Leah is back in Charlotte. Owen is in development on something new. Zoe is at a desk somewhere right now, reading a contract, making sure someone else doesn't have to learn what she learned. And somewhere, a man is sitting in a coffee shop in Nashville with $41,000 less than he started with. A woman is sitting in a house with $23,400 less and a marriage at a crossroads. A man with his number blocked is opening a legal letter with Zoe's attorney's name at the top. These things have a way of landing where they belong. Not always immediately, not always dramatically, but eventually and completely, and in ways that are better than anything you could have planned. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next week. This is Venture and Karma.